The sun had just started to rise over the quiet countryside, painting the sky in shades of gold and orange. A light mist still clung to the grass, and the soft sounds of birds filled the air. In a small wooden house that sat on the edge of a forest, a man woke up before the world around him. He had lived this way for years, alone, peaceful, and hidden from the noise of life. The man's name was Jack Reynolds. Most people in the nearby town didn't know much about him. They only saw him sometimes in the grocery store or at the farmer's market. He never talked much, always polite, always calm. He drove an old truck and wore the same kind of jacket no matter the season. But there was one thing that everyone remembered about Jack, his dog. The dog was a large Belgian Malinois with a thick coat and eyes so alert they almost seemed to understand every word spoken. His name was Max. To anyone who didn't know better, Max looked like a police dog, disciplined, quiet, and always by Jack's side. Wherever Jack went, Max followed, and wherever Max went, Jack was never far behind. The two of them had a bond that people could feel, even from a distance. When Jack spoke softly, Max listened. When Jack stopped walking, Max stopped too. They didn't need leashes or commands. They just moved together like they shared one mind. No one in the town knew the truth about who Jack really was. They didn't know that years ago. Jack had been one of the most respected and skilled members of the U.S. military's most secretive unit, Delta Force. He had been sent into places that most people only saw in movies. He had saved lives, stopped attacks, and faced danger that few could even imagine. But he never talked about it. When he came home from his last mission, he didn't tell anyone. He simply disappeared from the military world, bought a small piece of land in the countryside, and decided to live quietly. He wanted peace. After years of hearing gunfire and chaos, he wanted to wake up to the sound of birds, not helicopters. He wanted to drink his coffee while watching the sunrise instead of waiting for orders. Max was the only reminder of that life. The two had met overseas when Max was just a young military dog in training. Jack had been assigned to work with him, and from the first day they had formed an unbreakable connection. They trained together, fought together, and saved each other more times than either could count. When Jack retired, he refused to leave Max behind. He went through every possible step to make sure Max could come home with him. After long months of paperwork, approvals, and signatures, Max was finally allowed to leave service. From that day on, the two were inseparable. Jack's neighbors saw them often during early morning walks. He would stroll along the dirt road near his house, hands in his jacket pockets, while Max ran ahead and back again, always checking on him. Sometimes they would stop by the local diner. Jack would sit outside with a cup of coffee while Max lay quietly at his feet. The waitress, a friendly woman named Diane, always brought out a small plate with a piece of bacon for Max. "Your dog's better behaved than most people," she'd often say with a laugh. Jack would smile softly. "He's had good training," he'd reply, but deep down, it wasn't just training that made Max special. It was the bond between them. A bond formed through trust, loyalty, and survival. Jack's home was simple. A one-story cabin surrounded by trees with a small shed and a fenced yard for Max. Inside, the house had little furniture, a couch, a table, and a few framed photos. One picture showed Jack and Max during their time in service, both wearing their gear, dirt on their faces, eyes sharp and focused. It was the only piece of his past that Jack allowed himself to keep on display. Life in the countryside was quiet. Jack spent his days working on small projects around the house, fixing fences, tending to his garden, helping neighbors when they needed an extra hand. In the evenings, he would sit on his porch, sometimes with a book, sometimes just watching the sunset while Max lay beside him. It was a simple life, but it was the kind of peace he had earned. Yet even in peace, there were moments when memories from the past came rushing back. Some nights, when thunder rolled in from the distance, Max would lift his head and look toward Jack as if sensing his unease. Jack would give him a small pat and whisper, "It's all right, buddy. We're home now." That was all it took. The storm would pass and calm would return. People in town liked Jack, though few really knew him. He was polite but private, always ready to help if someone needed something. If a neighbor's fence broke, Jack fixed it. If someone's tractor got stuck in the mud, Jack was the first to show up with his truck and a tow line. He didn't ask for money or thanks. He just did what was needed and went back home. There was something about him that gave people a sense of quiet respect. He carried himself differently, not with arrogance but with a steady confidence. Some guessed he had been in the military, but no one dared to ask too much. As for Max, he had become somewhat of a local celebrity. Kids in the area loved watching him do small tricks. Jack would toss a stick far across the yard, and Max would dart after it so fast he was just a blur of tan and black. Then he'd come running back, drop the stick at Jack's feet, and sit perfectly still, waiting for the next command. One time, a small boy asked Jack how he got Max to listen so well. Jack smiled and said, "He doesn't listen because he has to. He listens because he trusts me." That sentence stayed with the boy's father for weeks afterward. As the seasons changed, Jack and Max settled into their quiet rhythm. Every morning started the same way. Jack brewed coffee, poured Max a bowl of water, and they walked down to the lake. The air was always crisp and fresh there, and Max would splash around near the shore while Jack stood watching, lost in thought. He often wondered if this peace would last. After everything he had seen in life, he found it hard to believe that peace could ever be permanent. But whenever Max ran up to him, tail wagging and eyes bright, Jack felt a warmth in his chest that reminded him it was possible, at least for now. One cold morning, as frost covered the ground, Jack was repairing a section of his wooden fence that had been weakened by the wind. Max was beside him, sniffing around the bushes. The sound of hammering echoed softly through the quiet air. Every few minutes, Jack would glance over at Max to make sure he was nearby. It was then that a car passed by on the main road, an unfamiliar sound in that usually still area. Max's ears perked up and his body tensed slightly. Jack noticed and said calmly, "It's okay, boy." Max relaxed and went back to exploring. Moments like that reminded Jack how deeply attuned Max was to everything around them. He wasn't just a pet. He was a protector, always alert, always ready. As evening came, Jack sat by the fireplace inside his cabin. The flames flickered warmly, lighting up the wooden walls. He looked at Max, who was curled up on the rug, sleeping peacefully. Jack smiled to himself. "Good boy," he whispered. "You've done enough for a lifetime." Outside, the wind rustled through the trees and the night settled in quietly. For Jack, this was all he needed. The soft sound of nature, the warmth of the fire, and the steady breathing of his companion nearby. But what Jack didn't know was that peace can be fragile. Sometimes it takes only a single misunderstanding, one simple mistake to change everything. For now, though, he had no reason to worry. Life was steady, calm, and honest. He spent his days in the garden, walked through town once a week, and took long hikes in the woods with Max leading the way. They shared meals, shared silence, and shared a trust that ran deeper than words. In that little cabin, tucked away from the world, they had created their own kind of happiness, one built on loyalty, love, and quiet strength. When the sun set each evening, the sky would turn a soft shade of red and purple, and Jack would step outside with Max at his side. Together they'd watch the last light fade behind the trees. Sometimes Jack would speak softly, almost as if to himself. "You know, buddy," he'd say, "I think we finally found what we were looking for." Max would look up at him, ears perked, tail gently wagging as if he understood every word. And for a while, everything truly was perfect. The morning started like any other day. The sky was pale blue, the air still cool, and the smell of damp grass filled the countryside. Jack woke early, as he always did. He brewed his coffee, filled Max's water bowl, and opened the back door to let him out into the yard. The gentle jingle of Max's collar was one of those sounds Jack had grown to love. Max ran across the yard, his paws leaving small prints in the soft earth. Jack leaned on the porch rail and watched, a faint smile on his face. The world was quiet, peaceful, just as he liked it. After breakfast, Jack grabbed his tools. He planned to fix a section of the fence again, this time near the front of the property. Max followed him, tail wagging, tongue out, happy just to be beside him. Jack talked to him as he worked, like always. "You know, buddy," he said, hammering a nail into the wood, "we've been lucky here. No noise, no trouble, no one bothering us, just how it should be." Max tilted his head as if listening carefully. Jack chuckled and shook his head. "Yeah, I know," he said softly. "Too quiet, maybe." After finishing his work, Jack wiped his hands on a rag and stood up to stretch. The sun had climbed higher now, the heat slowly building. He decided to head into town for a few supplies. Before leaving, he poured Max a fresh bowl of water and gave him a gentle pat. I won't be long, he said. Stay, boy. Max sat near the porch steps, watching him with those deep, alert eyes. It took Jack less than an hour to get what he needed: some food, a few tools, and fuel for the generator. When he returned, everything seemed normal at first. The air was still, the birds were chirping, and the house stood just as he left it. But then he noticed the gate. It was open. Jack frowned. He always made sure it was closed, especially because Max loved to explore. He set the groceries down and called out. Max! No sound. Jack's chest tightened slightly. He walked around the side of the house, calling again. Max, come! Still nothing. He walked out to the road, scanning the fields. There were no cars, no people, just open land stretching into the distance. Jack whistled sharply, a command Max had always obeyed. A few moments passed before a faint barking echoed from far away. Jack exhaled in relief. It was Max, but the sound was coming from the road down the hill. Jack started walking quickly, calling out again. As he got closer, he noticed a parked car near the end of the road. 2 local police vehicles were there too, their lights flashing softly. A few officers stood near the ditch, talking to someone. Jack's steps slowed. Something felt wrong. He couldn't see Max. He called out again, louder this time. Max, come here, boy. One of the officers turned toward him. Sir, please stay back, he called. Jack froze in confusion. That's my dog, he shouted back. The officer's expression changed, but he didn't answer right away. Jack's heart began to race. He took a few more steps forward until another officer raised a hand. Sir, stay where you are, the man said firmly. We've got a situation here. Jack looked past them, and that's when he saw it. Max, sitting by the roadside near the grass, looking nervous but unharmed. The dog's ears perked up at the sound of Jack's voice, and he started to move toward him. It's all right, boy, Jack called. Come on. But before Max could reach him, one of the officers stepped forward, speaking sharply into his radio. Jack couldn't make out the words, but the tension in the air was unmistakable. What's going on? Jack demanded. That's my dog. He's not dangerous. One of the officers hesitated, looking unsure. We got a call about an aggressive animal, he said. Neighbors said a large dog was running loose. We were told it might have scared a child. Jack shook his head in disbelief. He wouldn't hurt anyone. He's trained. Look at him. He's calm. And it was true. Max wasn't barking or growling. He just stood there, looking between Jack and the officers, tail slightly lowered, waiting for direction. Jack took a slow step forward. Let me get him, he said quietly. But the officers exchanged nervous glances. The situation was already tense, and they didn't know who Jack was. Just a man in work clothes on a rural road. The oldest officer finally spoke. Sir, please let us handle this. We need to make sure everyone's safe. Jack's voice was steady but firm. He's my partner, he said. He understands me. You're safe as long as you stay calm. There was a pause. The sound of the wind rustled through the trees. Then finally, one of the officers lowered his stance slightly. All right, he said carefully. Call him in slowly. Jack nodded. He crouched down and opened his arms. Max, come. The moment Max heard his voice, he ran forward, straight toward Jack, tail wagging, eyes bright. It was the same sight Jack had seen 1,000 times before. When Max reached him, Jack wrapped his arms around him, relief washing through him like a wave. Good boy, he whispered. You're okay. The officers relaxed slightly as they realized the dog wasn't dangerous. One of them even apologized. Sorry about that, sir. We didn't know. Jack stood up and gave a small nod. It's all right. He must have slipped through the gate. After a few moments of talking, the situation eased. The officers took down some notes, explained that a neighbor had panicked, and then they left. Jack led Max back home, his hand resting gently on the dog's back the entire way. As they walked, Jack couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that lingered. He wasn't angry. Not exactly. But something about the encounter bothered him. He had seen too many situations spiral out of control from fear and misunderstanding. When they reached the cabin, Jack closed the gate carefully, checking the latch twice. Then he sat on the porch steps, staring out at the horizon while Max lay beside him. "You did good, buddy," Jack said softly. "I should have been here. I won't make that mistake again." Max looked up at him, ears twitching, and let out a soft sigh as he rested his head on Jack's foot. The rest of the day passed quietly. Jack worked in his shed while Max dozed nearby. The evening light turned golden, stretching long shadows across the grass. It should have felt peaceful again. But for Jack, something had shifted. He kept replaying the scene in his mind, the flashing lights, the worried looks, the way the officers had reacted before understanding the situation. He knew they were only doing their job, but it reminded him of something he'd spent his life trying to forget. How quickly things could change when fear took over. Later that night, he sat by the fireplace with a cup of coffee. The room was warm, but his thoughts were far away. He reached down to pet Max's head, running his hand through the dog's fur slowly. "You're more than just a dog," he said quietly. "You've been through more than most people ever will." Max shifted slightly, his eyes half closed but alert. He always seemed to understand the tone of Jack's voice, not the words, but the meaning behind them. Jack leaned back in his chair, the firelight flickering across his face. For years he had managed to stay out of sight, away from the chaos of the world. But today reminded him that peace was fragile, that even a simple misunderstanding could stir up trouble in unexpected ways. Still, he told himself it was nothing to worry about. The officers had been respectful, and no harm had been done. Tomorrow would be another quiet day. The next morning the sun rose bright and clear again. Jack opened the door, and Max bounded outside like nothing had ever happened. Jack watched him run through the yard, chasing the wind, tail wagging. "Back to normal," Jack said softly. He poured himself another cup of coffee and sat on the porch. The sound of the woods surrounded him, rustling leaves, distant birds, the gentle creak of the porch boards. Everything looked exactly as it always did. But deep down, Jack felt something he couldn't quite explain. A quiet unease, like a small crack had formed in the stillness he'd worked so hard to build. He couldn't help but wonder if life had a way of testing a man's peace, just to see how strong it really was. Max came trotting back, tail wagging proudly with a stick in his mouth. Jack smiled and reached for it. "All right," he said, tossing it across the yard. "Let's play." For a few moments, everything was perfect again. Just a man and his dog, sunlight pouring down, the sound of laughter echoing softly in the air. Neither of them knew that this simple peace, this ordinary day, was about to be tested in a way neither could have imagined. For now, though, Jack chose to believe in calm. He believed that tomorrow would be the same as today, quiet, steady, and full of small joys. He didn't know that fate had other plans waiting just beyond the horizon. The days after the incident with the officers passed quietly. Jack tried to push the memory aside, convincing himself that it was just a misunderstanding, nothing more. Max seemed back to his usual self, full of energy and focus. He followed Jack everywhere, from the porch to the garden to the woods beyond the house. But even though life appeared normal, something inside Jack had shifted. There was a weight in his chest that hadn't been there before. Every time he saw a car driving past his property or heard unfamiliar footsteps near the fence, he felt uneasy. He had lived through too many tense moments in his life to ignore his instincts. One morning, Jack was out chopping wood behind the house. Max sat nearby watching him, tail flicking from side to side. The rhythm of the axe hitting the logs echoed through the quiet forest. It was a peaceful sound, steady and grounding. Jack stopped for a moment to wipe the sweat from his forehead. "You're supposed to be helping," he joked, glancing at Max. The dog tilted his head as if pretending to understand, and Jack chuckled softly. As he stacked the wood, he noticed a car slowly approaching down the road. It wasn't one he recognized. The vehicle came to a stop near his gate and two people stepped out, both wearing uniforms. Jack frowned slightly, set the axe down, and walked toward the fence. "Morning," one of them said politely. "Sorry to bother you. Are you Mr. Reynolds? That's right, Jack replied, keeping his tone even. Everything okay? The officer nodded. We just wanted to follow up on the report from last week, about your dog. Jack's jaw tightened slightly. What about it? The other officer, younger and visibly nervous, stepped forward. We got another call yesterday from someone in the area. Said they saw a similar dog roaming near the road again. Jack sighed quietly. Max hasn't left my property since that day. You can see the fence is closed. The officers looked around the yard where Max now stood near the porch, ears up, watching them closely. That him? The older one asked. Jack nodded. Yeah, that's Max. He's trained. He's been with me for years. The younger officer seemed hesitant. We're not trying to cause trouble, sir. We just have to check in whenever someone makes a report. Jack nodded, though his eyes stayed steady. I understand. You're doing your job, but maybe you can let whoever called know that my dog's not dangerous. He's a retired service animal. You don't need to worry about him. The officers exchanged a quick glance. Retired service dog? Yes, Jack said simply. He worked with me overseas. We've both done our time. There was a pause, a moment of realization in their eyes. They thanked him for his time, apologized for the inconvenience, and left soon after. When the car disappeared down the road, Jack turned toward Max. The dog wagged his tail, waiting for a signal. Jack smiled faintly. You're famous now, he said softly. People can't stop talking about you. He tried to make light of it, but deep down he knew this wasn't over. Small towns had a way of spreading stories. All it took was one misunderstanding, one rumor, and things could spin out of control. Later that week, Jack visited the local grocery store. He noticed that a few people gave him longer looks than usual. Some nodded politely, but others whispered behind their hands. It didn't take much for gossip to grow. At the counter, Diane, the friendly woman from the diner, looked concerned. Hey, Jack, she said softly. I heard something about the police coming by your place again. Everything okay? Jack gave a small smile. Yeah, it's fine. Just a mix-up. Max got out one day and now they think he's some kind of wild animal. Diane shook her head. That's ridiculous. That dog's an angel. Everyone around here knows that. Jack appreciated her words. Thanks, he said. He's been my family for a long time. When he got home that afternoon, he took Max for a walk along the trail behind their property. The forest was quiet except for the sound of leaves crunching under their feet. Jack liked to think best when he was out there, surrounded by nature, far from the noise of the world. He stopped by the lake and sat on a fallen log, watching the water ripple gently in the breeze. Max sat beside him, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. You ever wonder why peace never lasts? Jack said quietly. Seems like no matter how far you go, something always follows. Max looked up at him, his dark eyes calm and trusting. Jack reached over and scratched behind his ear. You don't have to worry about it, he said softly. That's my job. For the next few days, life carried on as usual. Jack worked on repairing the shed roof, tended his small garden, and even helped a neighbor tow a broken tractor out of the mud. He kept to himself as always, but he noticed that every now and then, a police cruiser would drive past his property, slow, deliberate, as if keeping an eye out. It didn't bother him too much at first, but it did remind him how fragile peace could be. One evening, just before sunset, there was a knock at his door. When Jack opened it, a man in plain clothes stood outside. He introduced himself as a detective from the nearby county. Sorry for the visit, Mr. Reynolds, the detective said. This won't take long. I just wanted to speak with you about your background. You served, correct? Jack hesitated before nodding. That's right, Delta Force? Jack gave a short, measured look. How do you know that? The detective smiled faintly. We check records when there are multiple reports involving a resident. You came up in the system. I just wanted to confirm. Jack crossed his arms lightly. I'm retired. Been out a long time. Understood, the detective said. Some of the local officers didn't realize who you were. They asked me to make sure everything was cleared up properly. I also wanted to personally apologize for any trouble you've had. Jack studied him for a moment, then nodded. Appreciated. Before leaving, the detective paused. It's not often we meet someone with your record. You've done a lot for this country. If there's ever anything you need, don't hesitate to call. Jack thanked him, and after the man left, he stood at the door for a while, lost in thought. He didn't like attention, not from anyone, especially not from law enforcement. But he couldn't deny the relief that came from knowing at least someone now understood who he was. Over the following week, things finally began to settle down. The police stopped driving by, the whispers in town faded, and Jack started to feel like life was returning to normal again. One afternoon, while sitting on the porch, he received a letter in the mail. The envelope had no return address, just his name typed neatly on the front. Inside was a short note. "Thank you for your service. We're sorry for what happened. We didn't know who you were." There was no signature, but Jack didn't need one to understand. He folded the note carefully and set it aside. He wasn't angry anymore, he never really had been. He just wanted people to understand that respect didn't come from rank or reputation. It came from how you treated others, even when you didn't know their story. That night, as he sat by the fireplace, he thought about all the people he had met in his life. Soldiers, strangers, and friends who had come and gone. Some had seen his strength, others his silence. But none had ever truly seen the side of him that Max brought out. The part that cared, that felt, that could still love after all the years of loss. Max stirred beside him, lifting his head slightly. Jack smiled and reached down to pat him. "You've been patient through all this, huh?" The dog wagged his tail lazily. Jack chuckled. "Guess you always knew what really matters. Doesn't matter what they say out there. What matters is right here." He gestured toward the quiet cabin, the firelight, the soft sound of crickets, the peace they had built together. As the night deepened, Jack found himself thinking about something the detective had said, about how people didn't know who he was. It reminded him how easy it was for others to judge based on what they saw, not what they knew, and maybe that was the lesson he was meant to learn in all of this. That everyone, no matter how ordinary they looked, had a story worth understanding. A few days later, he went into town again, and this time people greeted him differently. A few even thanked him quietly, having learned more about who he was. Jack never bragged or explained. He just nodded politely and went about his errands. When he returned home that evening, the sun was setting in soft orange light. He stood by the fence and watched Max run freely in the yard, strong and confident, a picture of loyalty and grace. Jack leaned against the post and smiled. "We made it through, didn't we?" he said softly. "No trouble, no noise, just peace." Max barked once as if agreeing, then trotted over to sit beside him. The two stood there in silence, watching the sky fade into shades of pink and gold. Jack knew that life had its way of testing people, even those who had already been through enough. But he also knew something else, that every challenge, no matter how small, carried a chance to remind you of who you truly were. And as he looked down at Max, he realized that maybe, just maybe, all the storms in life were worth it, because they made moments like this feel even more precious. The world around them was quiet again. The trees swayed gently in the evening wind. The air smelled of pine and earth, and the soft rhythm of Max's breathing beside him was steady and calm. Jack closed his eyes for a moment and smiled. He whispered, "This is what peace looks like." The next few months went by quietly. Jack had returned fully to his routine, spending most of his time working on small repairs, walking with Max and tending to his garden. Life was peaceful again, and it seemed like the tension from before had finally disappeared. The townspeople had grown used to seeing him around again. Some waved from their cars when they passed by his property. Others would stop for a quick chat when they saw him in town. Even though he preferred to keep to himself, Jack appreciated those small moments of kindness. Max, as always, was by his side everywhere he went. He had become something of a symbol of calm strength for the people who knew him. Kids who once felt nervous seeing a large dog now came up to pet him, and Max greeted them gently, his eyes full of patience. Jack liked watching those moments. He would smile quietly, knowing how far Max had come. From being a working service dog in dangerous places to living freely among open fields and curious children. It was the kind of transformation Jack wished for himself too. One morning, Jack was sitting at the diner, enjoying his coffee while Max rested at his feet. Diane, as usual, came by with a smile. "You two are early today," she said. "Couldn't sleep," Jack replied softly. The sunrise was too good to miss. She poured him another cup. You ever think about teaching folks how to train dogs like yours? You'd have a line out the door. Jack chuckled. He's the smart one, not me. Diane shook her head. No, he's loyal because you taught him to be. That's rare these days. Jack didn't answer right away. He looked down at Max and thought about everything they had been through together. The training, the missions, the moments when they had relied on each other completely. He realized that Diane was right. Loyalty wasn't something that just happened. It was earned through trust, patience, and care. That evening, back at home, Jack sat on the porch watching the sun dip behind the trees. Max lay next to him, his ears twitching as the sounds of crickets filled the air. The moment was so peaceful that Jack almost forgot how fragile peace could be. But life, as he had learned, always had a way of testing what people valued most. A week later, Jack got a visit from the same detective who had come by months earlier. This time, the man wasn't in uniform. He was dressed casually, holding a folder under his arm. "Afternoon, Mr. Reynolds," he said kindly. "Afternoon," Jack replied. "Everything all right?" The detective nodded slowly. "Nothing to worry about. I just wanted to talk about something that might interest you." Jack gestured toward the porch. "Go ahead." The man sat down, resting the folder on his lap. "After everything that happened with your dog a while back, some folks in the department started thinking. There's a program we've been trying to get off the ground. A joint project with local law enforcement to improve how officers handle situations involving service animals or veterans. I thought you might be the perfect person to help." Jack raised an eyebrow. "Me?" The detective nodded. "You have experience most of us can't even imagine. You've seen what discipline and trust look like in their purest form. We could use that, especially after." "What happened?" Jack leaned back, silent for a moment. He wasn't sure how to feel. He had spent years avoiding attention, living quietly away from that world, but at the same time, the idea of helping others understand, of preventing mistakes like the one that almost cost Max his life, touched something deep inside him. "What would you need from me?" he finally asked. "Just your insight," the detective said. "We're not asking you to take on a full-time job. Maybe a few workshops, some talks, maybe a bit of training for the new recruits. Nothing formal unless you want it to be." Jack looked down at Max, who was sitting quietly by his side. "What do you think, boy?" he murmured. The detective smiled. "I'll take that as a maybe?" Jack gave a small nod. "I'll think about it." After the detective left, Jack sat there for a long time, staring out at the woods. He thought about the men and women he had trained with years ago, how they had trusted him with their lives, how they had learned to make calm decisions under pressure. Maybe this was his chance to pass some of that forward, to help people see things differently. That night, he wrote a short note on a piece of paper. "We protect what we understand." He pinned it to the wall near his desk, as a quiet reminder. A few weeks later, Jack agreed to help with the program. It started small, just one meeting at the local police training center. He brought Max along, and when the officers saw how well the dog responded to even the slightest hand gesture or tone of voice, they were amazed. Jack explained everything in simple, calm words. He didn't lecture, he didn't boast. He just talked about communication, patience, and respect, the things that kept people and animals safe. Max demonstrated commands and stayed perfectly focused, even as people moved around or made noise. At one point, Jack said softly, "He doesn't listen to me because he's afraid of me. He listens because he trusts me." There's a big difference. The room went quiet. The young recruits were hanging on every word. By the end of the session, the officers applauded. The chief approached Jack afterward and said, "That was powerful. You changed how some of these kids see their job." Jack smiled faintly. "If it helps even one person make a calmer choice, it's worth it." The sessions continued every few weeks, and before long, people from nearby towns started asking Jack to visit their departments too. He didn't like to travel much, but he did it anyway, always bringing Max along. They became a team again, though this time their mission was different. Instead of surviving in dangerous places, they were helping others learn to avoid danger altogether. Word spread quietly about the mysterious retired soldier and his dog who taught peace through discipline. Jack never sought fame, but his story began to reach people he had never met. Some wrote letters of thanks. Others shared their own experiences of loss and misunderstanding. Jack read every single one, Many of them reminded him that the world was full of people trying to do their best, even when they made mistakes. One afternoon, he received a message from a young officer who had attended one of his sessions months earlier. The message read, "Sir, I wanted to thank you. Last week I responded to a call involving a scared dog. I remembered what you said about calm energy and trust. Instead of acting fast, I waited, talked softly, and the dog came to me without trouble. You were right. Patience changes everything." Jack folded the letter carefully and placed it in a small wooden box where he kept meaningful things. He didn't need awards or recognition. That note was enough. As time passed, Jack noticed that Max was slowing down a little. He wasn't as quick to run or jump as before, but his eyes still shone with the same steady intelligence. Jack adjusted their days, shorter walks, more rest, and plenty of quiet evenings on the porch. Sometimes when the sun went down, Jack would sit there with Max's head resting on his knee. He'd speak softly, more to himself than to the dog. "You've done more good than most people ever will," he'd say. "You helped save lives, and now you're teaching others how to keep them safe." Not bad for an old soldier and his partner. The bond between them was deeper than ever. It wasn't just about shared memories anymore. It was about understanding, the kind that didn't need words. One chilly autumn morning, Jack looked out across his yard and saw a small group of young officers walking up the road. They had come to visit, bringing coffee and pastries. "We just wanted to thank you in person," one of them said. "You've helped us more than you know." Jack invited them in, and soon the cabin was filled with laughter and easy conversation. Max moved among them calmly, letting each one pet him. For a man who had spent so long avoiding company, Jack found himself actually enjoying the noise. After they left, he sat back down, smiling to himself. Maybe peace didn't mean isolation after all. Maybe it was about connection, about using the quiet strength you carried to make others' lives a little better. That night, the sky was clear and full of stars. Jack stepped outside, feeling the crisp air on his face. Max followed him, walking slower than before, but still close. They stood there for a long time, the silence between them warm and familiar. Jack looked up and whispered, "You know, I used to think our best days were behind us. But maybe this, right here, is what it was all leading to." Max looked up at him, tail wagging gently. Jack smiled and reached down to pat his head. "Yeah," he said quietly. "We've done all right." The wind rustled softly through the trees, carrying the scent of pine and the faint hum of distant crickets. In that moment, everything felt whole. The mistakes of the past, the lessons learned, and the peace they had found, and all of it fit together perfectly, like pieces of the same long journey. Jack didn't know what the future would bring, but he wasn't afraid of it anymore. He had learned that even after a lifetime of storms, it was still possible to build something calm, something good. And as he turned to head inside with Max walking beside him, he felt that quiet truth settle deep in his heart. Peace isn't given. It's built, one patient moment at a time. The winter came quietly that year. Snow began to fall across the open fields around Jack's cabin, covering everything in a calm white blanket. The air was cold and the days were shorter, but Jack didn't mind. He had come to enjoy the stillness that winter brought. It reminded him of the peace he had searched for most of his life. Each morning he would step outside with a cup of coffee, wrapped in a thick coat, and watch the sunrise. Max followed close behind, his paws leaving soft prints in the snow. They would walk together in silence, their breath visible in the cold air. Sometimes they didn't go far, just to the end of the old fence line, but it was enough. Those quiet walks had become Jack's favorite part of the day. The training sessions with the officers had slowed down for the season, but Jack kept in touch with many of them. Some called him to ask questions or share stories about their progress. Others sent photos of their dogs or the new programs they had started. Each message reminded Jack that something good had grown out of the pain he once carried. One morning while Jack was sitting by the fireplace reading, he received a letter in the mail. The handwriting was neat and familiar. It was from the detective who had first approached him months ago. The letter was short and simple. "Jack, I wanted you to know that the department has officially approved funding for a permanent training program, the one you helped us start. We'd like to name it after Max. You don't have to speak publicly about it, but we'd be honored if you'd attend the ceremony. D." Jack stared at the letter for a long time. He felt a mix of pride and sadness all at once. He looked down at Max, who was resting near the fireplace. They want to name the program after you, he said softly. Max lifted his head, his ears twitching as if he understood. Jack smiled. I guess you're famous now. The following week, Jack prepared for the event. He wasn't used to crowds or attention, but this felt different. It wasn't about recognition. It was about purpose. The idea that Max's name, the name of a dog who had served faithfully and loved unconditionally, would stand for something that helped others filled Jack with quiet joy. When the day came, he put on his old formal jacket, the one with a small patch still sewn on the inside from his days in service. He didn't wear any medals or decorations. He never liked showing them off. He believed respect should come from who you were, not what you had done. The ceremony took place at the training center where Jack had first held his workshops. The building looked bright and new, freshly painted with banners hanging near the entrance.